All right, welcome back. This is CSIS 2200, Managing Information Systems. This will be part number 1, and we're focusing in on global information systems. All right, so in this chapter, we're going to discuss primarily what global information systems are, some of the reasons why companies select these management information systems, some of their components, the organizational structures, and some of the obstacles to using a GIS system. So this course is primarily based on managing an information system, and this is just the next step up, which is basically a managing information system for multinational organizations. So to get started, I thought I'd sort of go back a bit and talk about the history of globalization and how it kind of got started a bit here. So what I did was I posted a YouTube video that does an excellent job at documenting kind of the history of one of the largest globalized companies in the world, called the Dutch West India Company, back in 1623. I highly encourage you to watch this. It's fascinating. If you ever watched that movie, Pirates of the Caribbean, and the company that was sort of going against the pirates, this was it. And it's the largest company ever to be created ever in history, with the total net valuation in today's dollars of $7.9 trillion, and occupied, I think they employed close to 5% of the world's population at the time. And it was a really fascinating story, and it stems on the trade of tulips, which sounds very unusual to have such a large company for tulip bulbs. And also they were the first stock market publicly traded. So anyway, I'd encourage you to watch this. It's a great introduction to how globalization started in the Western world. Just a note here that the Dutch West India Company, the reason they became so large is because they were unregulated, they were unrestricted, and there was no opposition. In fact, they were so large they had their own army, navy, primarily a navy. All right, so let's talk about you guys and how globalization kind of fits into where you're going to be. You might not think that you're going to be working in another country. You're probably planning to work maybe in Canada, but there's a good chance that that company that you're working for could be an international or have international connections, and therefore may have a large GIS system, not just a managing of an information system in a regional, local area, but it could be far-reaching, and it could have multiple tiers to it. So what this chapter does is it goes through and kind of explains the supply chain, that value chain that we talked about in earlier chapters, and how you fall into a particular role in that, whether it's in the collection of raw materials for a product, it's the suppliers of those raw materials, or the production of those. Let's say you're in an oil and gas company, or if you're in like Weyerhaeuser, the pulp and paper industry, or if you're in the manufacturing of that. You could be in a distribution company, you could be in a sales to get that product to the market. So there are all these kind of connections that have to work together. And to this date and time, when we're talking about a managing information system, we're looking primarily at one company managing its own system. But because they have partnering companies that they have to work with, sometimes it works very well if you've got one system that everybody uses. And there is global information systems out there. There's not a lot of them because it's such a specialized, large software system. It requires a few companies that produce that. So primarily companies do this for a lot of advantages. They can source materials out from globally rather than just regionally. If we had to rely on manufacturing just in one country, we'd have to look for raw materials, of course, in our own country and find suppliers, develop it into a product, ship it to a store, and eventually to the customer, which would really restrict our ability to what kind of products that each country could trade with amongst itself. So global economy has a huge advantage. As as you seen in the earlier slide here with the Dutch West Indian Company, they created the first global trading system. And as a result, it became the largest company in the world. So as an example, like if you might be wearing a pair of shoes, and those shoes, the leather might have come from Italy, and that leather might have been shipped over to China to be manufactured into a shoe. It might have been then sent back to Ireland for quality assurance for checking, and then they're shipped from distributed all over the world from that particular location. So something like Aldo shoes, you might be familiar with that, and that's a similar kind of supply chain of what happens when you get your shoes. So different pieces come from different parts. Now we need a managing information system that can pull all that together, but because we're in different parts of the world, we need a GIS system to do that. So why go global? Well, it seems kind of obvious now, I think, at this point. Companies do this primarily to reduce their costs. They want to be able to bring a product cost down. They can purchase raw materials at different countries for a lower price. They can send the raw materials to other countries for manufacturing at maybe a reduced labor cost to be manufactured, and then they can distribute it to different countries around the world. So what are some examples of these companies? Well, companies like Procter & Gamble, Hewlett-Packard, McDonald's, Nestle, Motorola, and etc. There's just so many multinational companies. Do we have a lot of these in Vancouver? Not as much in Vancouver. More of these companies are headquartered in Toronto, in Canada, but we do have them in Vancouver as well. I mean, we have Microsoft in Vancouver, we have HP in Vancouver, but it's not their head office. We have a regional office. So again, these are prime users or companies that use global information systems. These are large global organizations that can reduce costs by putting stuff, collecting it all together and making it more efficient. Economy of scale. So, and again, why do companies do this? Well, it seems kind of obvious. Access to cheaper labor. We know that a lot of our clothes and products are made in other countries where labor costs could be cheaper than they are here. So, but raw material might be in other countries, we can ship stuff around the world now because of the shipping containers that move all these products back and forth around the world. Another reason is this ability to sell products locally and internationally. And as we've talked about in the e-commerce, we know that these products can come from virtually anywhere, but a lot of these products do come from the country that they're manufactured in, because that's where they're created and that's where they're stored. So we can purchase products from the country and then have them shipped to us. Now, if you're a smaller company, not just a consumer, you can still do the same thing. You can contact another country and have a whole lot of these, a whole minimum order quantity, that MOQ, sent to your company, and then you can distribute them within your own, here in Canada, for example. All right, so just to give you an idea, because some of you may be applying for jobs at companies here in Canada and in Vancouver, Magna International, BCE, Bombardier, the Four Seasons Hotel, Lululemon. Just had a friend of mine who just got a job at Lululemon. They're becoming a multinational company. BlackBerry, well, they're kind of lost their market share. McDonald, Detweiler and Associates, and so on. So these are the top kind of 10 multinational companies. When I did a quick search for it, that was about a year ago I did that. There could be new ones that are coming to Vancouver. Probably the newest one that came to Vancouver that you should be aware of is Amazon. They're building a large center and distribution center out in Delta, and there's a large distribution center and head office in downtown Vancouver, and they will be applying or looking for up to 3,000 new jobs. So if you're interested in working for Amazon, start looking online and see what kind of job postings there are, and Amazon will be an employer using a global information system. All right, so what kind of systems are out there? So when we're talking about global information systems, we could really synonymously change the name to an enterprise resource planning. So this is the term that you hear a lot. So a colleague of mine, it works for TransLink or the SkyTrain people, and they are currently in the process of implementing an ERP system. So an ERP system is an enterprise resource planning, which is a GIS system. Sometimes they're used interchangeable, but if you guys are looking on Indeed for jobs and you're looking for companies that use ERPs, just put that into the search term as ERP. I think ERP will come up because I think GIS sometimes comes up as a graphical information system or a geographical information system. So sometimes the acronyms get changed. So I think what's more common in the industry to use is ERP. So the top ERP programs out there on the market are SAP. So I think it stands for Simple Accounting Program, which systems application product. I've seen different acronyms for this one, but depends on which site you go to. SAP has a large office in downtown Vancouver, and they employ probably over 1,000 people. It consumes a complete city block in downtown Vancouver and Yaletown, and they have offices around the world. This is an ERP system that has multiple components to it. So again, this would be another company I would highly recommend if you guys can get into SAP. This is a international company, and it provides opportunity for a lot of travel. It's really good. I had a colleague that worked for them, and they stayed with them for years. Microsoft also has an ERP system. It's called Microsoft Dynamics 365. This is another one that you might come across, and it might be one that you're working with when you get a job. So I put some links in here as well. And I put these in because I wanted to show you, at the time of the recording that I did this, I did a search in Indeed, and I found there was 46 jobs in Vancouver that were looking for people that understand an ERP system using SAP, and 668 jobs using Microsoft Dynamics 365. Now, when it says 668 jobs using Microsoft Dynamics, well, there is a lot of components to this. So there are jobs out there for human resources, HR, project management, resource management, and so on. So it depends on the company that you're working with, may have these as different modules. So each one of these on their own is a managing information system, MIS. Putting them all together, they work together as a global information system or an ERP system. So, and it's got some other outside. We know what B2C is, and B2B, and B2B, and 2C online. So it's a full, comprehensive software system for managing a company. It has everything from being able to keep track of your payroll to typing out, reports to procuring raw materials. It all connects and works together. It has large databases that connect all the data. So it makes it a lot easier for companies to track their data and to correlate data from different areas. So if I've got a human resource, I know everybody who works within the entire company and where they work, and I could do data analytics on that in the payroll department, for example. So payroll has to pay all their people. So of course there's a connection between these two right here. So that's kind of what ERP systems are. Oracle is one that Amazon uses. So if you're out there and you're wanting to research a little more, I would say that you guys could go in here and research SAP or even a component of SAP, because the SAP is like the Microsoft one here, where it has all of these different managing information systems. So you could focus on it in just one, or you could look at a broad base of all of these and sort of get a better understanding of how it works. So you can watch videos, understand. They allow for free trials. So you can try it out. They've got demos, that kind of thing. So this is another area if you're very interested. And then at least you'd have a better understanding of what Microsoft Dynamics does. And, maybe go on to LinkedIn Learning. And as you guys know, your assignments, I've provided 3 optional courses that you guys have to take on your own. So I would encourage you, for example, if you did choose to do something like this, that you get into LinkedIn Learning and look up the courses on Microsoft Dynamics and get those certificates on your LinkedIn profile. Learn a little bit more about that so that you can apply for jobs. And you're kind of a little bit more job ready. You probably won't be have enough knowledge to use the product, but you'll at least understand how the intricacies work and a better understanding of how it fits together within an organization. So if you go for a job interview, you'll be better prepared. Companies tend to adopt a GIS system or an ERP system when it's moving out and expanding beyond its borders. So once you've left your country of origin and you're dealing with other countries, that tends to be a signal point when a GIS system becomes more relevant for the company. So some of the required developments, those require a better understanding, and GIS systems have a deeper understanding of things like customs and laws, because when you are working with other countries, there's a lot of customs regulations and legal requirements that some countries have, or tariffs, or different taxes, or duties. Now, if you're just running within your own country, you probably aren't dealing with those as much. So these GIS systems have a very comprehensive customs and law area and expertise. And that translates over into technical issues as well, because we're dealing with sending data to other countries, and then that data may have to be protected. It might have to have a VPN, etc. So my point there is that these GIS systems, because we're going across borders, they have to have more information and ability. So, for example, if we're purchasing something out of the U.S., some things may not be allowed or legal. Like, for example, in Canada, cannabis is legal, but if we are working with a global system and we're connected to the U.S., that could be problematic, because at a federal level, cannabis is still illegal in the U.S., and therefore it could trigger some kind of a legal problem for the company. So they have to have a clear understanding of how those things work, and that's what GIS systems also facilitate. Well, what are these advantages of globalizing a company? Companies back in the 80s and 90s started merging together. They saw the advantage by companies coming together, making them larger, and globalization. The globalization movement started in the 80s with the merging of a lot of these companies. Nestle was one of the key ones. Kraft Foods, Kraft and Heinz, they've merged together, and what they're doing is they're pulling together resources that they have in other countries that they can then share and reduce their costs, make it cheaper for the consumer, and therefore consumers will buy more of it, creating more profit, which just makes sense. The downside can be that these companies become so large, they dominate the industry, and then they have more control over price control. So if there's no competitors because they've completely dominated the market, then they can manipulate prices, essentially creating a monopoly in a particular area, which can then become bad for consumers because there's no competition. All right, so you might think, well, what are the disadvantages of globalization? It sounds like it's a pretty good idea, and it is for the most part, but there is issues, of course. Regional labor issues. You've heard of sweatshops in other countries. When you're globalizing, you hear a lot of this in the news with certain companies like Nike, for example. When they're manufacturing shoes, they manufacture it in countries that have the cheapest hourly rates, and there's no control over who's actually manufacturing or producing their products. So they can hire children because in North America, we can't do that. We have laws, but in other countries, they may not have those same laws, and there might be exploiting as from our view or our values, we might see that as exploitation of maybe children when they're manufacturing it. So globalization does have some disadvantages when it comes to labor issues. Other problems, and I think this is pretty obvious, is environmental issues. Within North America, we might have a certain environmental restrictions for developing a product, but then if we send it over to another country, they may have different environmental regulations, and as a result, that's why they can produce the product at a cheaper price. So there's a price to pay when you're buying a product and it's really cheap. You might think, okay, I'm getting this for a very good deal, but there's a consequence. And some of the consequences of globalization, of course, could be the human factor and the environmental factor. And there could be other factors as well. I usually discuss this and when we have a face-to-face meeting and have classes, and we could talk about, possibly other disadvantages that globalization does bring. So one of the big things when we're talking about globalization is we're talking about e-business a lot of times, because we're selling products around the world. And of course, we can't go shopping around the world unless we're doing this electronically. Hence, we're going to do this electronic business online. And it became a driving force for globalization. And it really accelerated. And I said globalization started, to surge in the 80s and 90s with a lot of these corporations merging together. But it really took off in the 90s and 2000s with online and e-commerce, the emergence of e-commerce coming out, because you could buy products in different countries. So what was the driving force? Well, first of all, I think it was also variety, because, we had such a limited amount of, products that we could purchase in our own country. We basically were limited to what the store was bringing in. And the store would bring in products from different countries, but it was up to them to see what they wanted. But what globalization did with e-business is it put the power into the consumer's hand, and it opened up a whole new market. So a lot of those brick and mortar companies, as you remember from the e-commerce chapter, started to suffer, and a lot of them closed, and that retail stores across the world have drastically declined, and a lot of them have gone out of business. But the other main reason for GIS is, of course, always money, revenue generating, reducing the cost of the product so they can sell it at a cheaper and be more efficient. If you can produce a product, even if you're shipping it to different locations in the world, it can still be cheaper if the labor is cheaper and the expertise in those countries is better, and you can do more quantity of them. And that's really what companies are doing these days. So as a consumer, we've really benefited in the last 10 to 20 years with this development, but there's always a cost at some point. Another cost that you might consider is when we globalize, we're moving jobs around the world. And as a result, your own country is losing those jobs. So your economy and your GDP suffers for that. This is really common in the United States. Over the past 20 years, the United States has been globalizing and wanting to create cheaper products. So it doesn't matter what product you have in front of you or you use. If you look at where it was manufactured, most products aren't manufactured in the United States. They're manufactured outside, but they're purchased in the United States. So the money in the U.S. has been flowing out of the United States for 20 years, and as a result, massive job losses have occurred because there's been a distribution of wealth and jobs globally. Now, some people might say that's a good thing because you're sharing money and you're sharing resources globally rather than having someone like the Americans kind of hoarding it all. And, I'm not trying to get political, but, the U.S. is trying to bring that back. And in a sense, they're trying to reverse this whole globalization trend with certain countries. But we won't get political here. But you can see, you probably have heard and know what some of this is that's going on at the time of this recording. Globalization really has been focusing also on just buying products, selling products, and services. Now, services are things like if you wanted to design a house, for example, you could put out a job onto a service online, and then people from around the world that have the expertise in doing that, they can bid on it, and you could put up almost like a competition and then get it designed at a far less rate than if you were to hire a local designer, let's say in your own country, to do that. So this is another advantage, which again comes down to money. It's reducing your costs. It does add flexibility to traditional businesses, and sometimes traditional businesses use outside sources. So sometimes what will happen is a company won't have the expertise to do a particular job within the company, and they don't want to go out and hire because there's a commitment when you hire. There's a time process when you hire. So what they do is they put the work out online, And again, they attract people from around the world to do this. A very common one of this is help desks or phone centers. So a lot of times when you need help, let's say you need help with your bank account, your credit card, and you call, you'll get someone from a different country that's answering the phone, and they're probably in a completely different, well, they are in a totally different time zone, and so the companies are outsourcing jobs to do their own work for their company. So companies have more flexibility than they used to in those traditional businesses. The other thing is, deliver timely and relevant information. Sure, if the example I just said, if you want timely and relevant, if you need access to information, you can just call, and someone in another country, a different time zone, can access it and do it right then. If you were only relying on your own country, you probably only have certain office hours when it's available to you. Globalization facilitates different groups working together. Like I just said, for example, an IT or technical support could be in another country. You can cooperate. And what they're saying here in this slide is it breaks up silos, meaning within a company, you've got departments, and these departments are considered like a silo, an individual isolated group. And you're no longer having these isolated groups. You can break those down and outsource those. And you hear this term a lot, this outsourcing work. And there's been, again, it's got pros and cons. You're taking jobs out of your country and you're spending money in other countries. So that's going to benefit those other countries, but not your own country. But you're going to gain a cheaper service for that. So you're sacrificing the convenience of a cheaper service at the moment, but over the long term, your country loses those those revenues. Now, that's again pros and cons, and really depends on what type of job you're working on, whether it affects you or not. Again, this allows for sharing information with customers. That's I think pretty obvious. Collaborating with partner companies. Again, GIS systems are going to be a way for you to communicate with your partner company. And one thing I will say here is if the company is moving to a GIS system or an ERP system, and they have to look at their partners and see what GIS or ERP systems they're using. The reason is that if you use the same things like General Dynamics, the Microsoft Dynamics 365, then and the other companies are using it, the data is easily transferred and it cooperates. You can do better data analytics without sort of middleware to help bridge the gap. So with collaborating with partner companies, it really helps if these ERP systems are the same. So bridging the gap is what they're talking about there. Enabling consumers to indulge in comparison shopping. I think all of us have gone online. We've looked at a product and we've shopped around. And as you know, if you go to a store, and a lot of times you can find the same product manufactured at the same place, same color, same size, same quality, everything, but at a far cheaper place, because you're not dealing with a salesperson, you're not dealing with a store that's paying for rent or the utilities, etc. So you're going direct. So it gives the consumer a lot more power. It's provided, this whole e-commerce and this e-business has provided an opportunity for individuals or to find a place in the supply chain, or intermediates or brokers to sort of act as a liaison between the warehouse or the manufacturer and the consumer. A common place you'll find this, and this is very a lot of people are doing this, is on Amazon. You can create your own little company on Amazon by finding products in other countries and then drop shipping it from those countries directly to the consumer. So all you're doing is acting as an intermediary or technically a broker to sell that product. So, and it's, you have control over that. So if you buy a product in another country and it's $1 and you advertise it on Amazon for $1.50, if somebody buys it, you would collect the 50-cent profit. Now, there's a lot of people doing this, so there's a lot of competition. So you'll notice when you search for products, there'll be the same product with these virtual stores. These are the different intermediaries that are collecting products from around the world, and trying to ship them to you. And they all have sort of different shipping and prices. So that's why people, and you probably have done this, you've shopped around to try to find the best deal. And then from there, there's also the rating system that we use. So you've probably been told or asked for, to rate your transaction, your experience. So companies are motivated to try to deliver the best service they can because they get rated. And if the ratings are bad, people tend not to go there. So the companies basically can lose out. So essentially what we're talking about here is we're bridging a gap between the producer who manufactures the product and the consumer. So as a consumer, sometimes this is hard to see because we see a product online and we see a price and we order it, but we don't realize that there's an intermediary or broker that's in between. We have the ability to search out where the product is manufactured and go directly to the manufacturer. Now, sometimes that's not always the case because manufacturers don't sometimes like dealing with the consumer. They don't like to do the B2C model. They like to do just the B2B. So they may say that they'll only sell a certain amount of products to the broker or the intermediary, and then they sell it on some platform like Amazon, for example. All right, so I've already gone over the 30 minutes, so I'll cut this one off here, and I'll see you in part number 2.